Hello, everybody. This is Jim Crumbly. I am a member of PASS, and I want to welcome you to the PASS Summer Series. This is session number 2. The first one was last week, where we went over the Rev 7 guidelines and some of the important changes there. Today, we've got an exciting topic and a great panel. Today, we're going to be talking about lessons learned. On the panel, I've got Paul Tim, I've got Guy Grace and Michael Dorn. I'll let them introduce themselves in a few moments. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I am an integrator and consultant and have been a part of PASS since the very beginning when we met, coincidentally, here in Atlanta about 11 years ago and began the process. As we open up with what we're trying to accomplish today, I want to remind everyone that what we typically do is to focus on active shooters. That's what the media focuses on. That's what is on a lot of people's mind. And it is important and it should be on their minds. But really, security and safety in the K-12 environment is not just about the active shooters. Many of the things that we do to mitigate risk involving active threats can also help on these day-to-day operations. So we're going to emphasize as much the lessons learned and how they apply on a daily basis as we will how they might apply to mitigate and respond to an active threat. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation. I'll be asking some questions. Our panel will be coming in with answers. We also want to ask all of the audience, if you have a question, throw it into the chat, and we're going to do everything we can to get to the questions that you may have related to this important subject. So, Paul, we'll start with you. Why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll move on down to Mr. Dorn and then Guy Grace.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. I'll keep it very brief because I know that my mom is the only one who really gives a lot of concern about this. But Paul Tim, I have a PSP that I've held since 2003. That's Physical Security Professional through ASIS International. I'm a published author. I have really spent most of my time conducting physical security assessments in schools. And I have a podcast, doesn't sell anything at all. It's called The Changing Face of School Security. And we have guests who come on and give tools and resources that can help you, from Chuck Wilson with PASS to Michelle Gay with Safe and Sound Schools to John Michael Keys with I Love You Guys, all guests on the podcast, all less than 30 minutes. Thank you for having me.
Michael, go ahead.
Good day, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been in the field 46 years. I'm the executive director of Safe Havens International. We're a nonprofit. We're a global organization. We're the largest K-12 school safety center in the world. Like Paul, the bulk of our work are school safety, security, climate, culture, and emergency preparedness assessments. We've assessed over 10,000 K-12 schools globally and worked in 24 countries. We do a lot of post-incident response. We've come in officially after over 300 catastrophic events, including 29 active assailant or terrorist attacks in K-12 schools in 4 countries. But as you mentioned, that's actually one of the rarest forms of death on U.S. K-12 campuses. And I've published 29 books in my field, and just a pleasure to be here.
All right, great, Mike. Guy?
Thank you. I'm honored to be on this panel with everybody. I'm Guy Grace. I'm a retired school security director. I'm in my 40th year of safety and security, 37 years in K through 12. I work for Oz Abloy. I'm the National Program Security Manager, program manager. What I do is educational opportunities, like Paul, similar to what Paul does right now in the industry. But I also am the steering committee chairman for the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. So what I do is help steer the direction of the types of components and recommendations that we will cover in the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. So I'm honored here to be here, and I thank everybody who is attending this conference or our presentation here today, especially if you are involved in school safety. You are ensuring the future of our great nation. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Guy. Well, let's go ahead and let's get started now, and let's get the active shooter question. We're going to start off there, all right, and then we'll build from it. So let me ask you this: is that the media perception is that school shootings are on the rise, and I want to know, what is that perception reality, Paul?
Well, it is not the reality, especially according to the latest FBI report, and it is maybe the greatest thing that we're fearful about. It causes people to make bad decisions and make knee-jerk reactions and load up on things that may or may not be helpful to them. But no, active shooter, while it is a threat that we're oh so concerned about, is not something that's first of all on the rise necessarily, and second of all, not the greatest as we think about multi-hazards, not even the greatest threat to safety and security of students and staff.
Well, Michael, what have you seen in your line of work? And I know you do a lot of expert witness. What's the perception and how does that impact schools' decisions?
I agree very much with something Paul just said, and I put it this way: we work fatalities every year that are due to misallocation of resources to either remotely feasible approaches focused on active shooter, or maybe things that could be good if you have an active shooter event, but to the exclusion of the things that cause most deaths, which are not active shooter. So, for a little context, the first two K-12 active shooter events in this country both occurred in 1891. We don't have accurate data until after Columbine. We became the first country, and to my knowledge, are still the only country that actually has mandatory reporting of homicide on school property. But a little bit more context: we have 55 million students in school every day, 9 million employees. That's more kids in our schools than all the human beings who live in Australia and Canada combined. That's more students and staff than live all the people who live in the UK. And I have a list of 20 European countries, and I threw in Israel, and we have a larger population than those 21 countries combined. The United Nations has documented over 10,000 mass casualty attacks on K-12 schools and institutions of higher learning worldwide in the last 9 years. So, contrary to the perception that this is unique to the United States, and we work quite a bit overseas, the U.S. actually has a much lower rate per capita of these types of events than the world as a whole does.
That's an interesting point because I would definitely say that the perception is different out in the community. But, we're not saying that it's not a threat. We're not saying that this is not something you need to focus on, because it absolutely is. Kids need to feel safe when they come to schools. Parents need to feel like that the staff and the school districts are ready for a serious incident if something happens. Are school shootings something that we can prevent? Guy, you wanted to start that one?
Well, I believe so. And why I believe that is because, I can say from my past experience, we've had detected anomalies or persons that were likely to act upon their desire to attack others or do self-harm and then harm others in their act of self-harm. But I look at too, we look at the statistics like from 2024 and 2025, we saw about a 23% decrease in the school shootings compared to the prior school year. Still very high when you think about it. But also keep in mind, when we look at the data that is often presented to us in K through 12, that data may be misconstrued. What I mean by that, it may be misreported. Like it could be in the proximity of a school, and some of the data amplifier or who compile this data will record it as a school shooting. So really, in a way, we don't have an accurate data base. But when we look at this, the decrease has been taking place. And I believe that's because we are solidifying our human roles and processes in our threat assessment processes, but also our human roles and processes in serving the needs of our at-risk students. Now, That doesn't address the bad actor from the outside, but I can say, especially being, at the tail end of my career, seeing a huge, tremendous leap in that ability of threat assessment, but also serving that at-risk community, but also too being aware and detecting those external threats as much as possible. So there's been a lot of, we see a lot of physical security hardening and a lot of the human roles and processes improvements in K through 12. So hopefully this number will decrease.
Right. Now
Continue
we're going
to
to get
decrease.
into a moment discussion about the steps that administrators can take to mitigate that kind of a risk, and based on some of the lessons learned. But real quickly, what role does mental health play and mental health resources play to helping students be safer on campus and even off campus?
You
Yep.
want to take
Guy,
go?
go ahead.
Okay. So when I look at that, when we, when our return of investment in K through 12 is academic performance, that ability for us to get that student to the next level, where that's going to be when they become an adult, whether that's going to be vocational school, a job, going to college, the military. And we look at what K through 12, there's a dynamic challenge with that, because the expectation is falling back onto K through 12 to have more services, more of interaction between our mental health practitioners, and also and improving the relativity of our climate and culture in K through 12. So that challenge is there, because one of the things you think about it, we in our country, you think that we have a school psychologist or a social worker or counselors in every school. That's not quite true. In fact, most of those counselors, or excuse me, most of those social workers, psychologists right now are serving multiple schools, or many districts right now are not able to fulfill and fill those roles, and they have to do this virtually. So that's a tremendous challenge on that. But also, too, you think about what are those social workers and mental health practitioners or psychologists being trained in? They're being trained in an assessment. For example, when they go to college, when they get their
Yeah,
EdSs or their doctorate's degree,
yeah.
they're not being trained on safety and security and threat assessment. So the problem is when we all work together, it's all of us have to lean on leading practices and lessons of the past to go forward.
All right, so what are some of those lessons that we've learned? I mean, it's hard to believe that Columbine was over 25 years ago. And there's been lots of changes in our culture and in our approach to security and our approach to safety. What are some of the most important things that an administrator can do to help mitigate the threat of an active shooter as well as the threat of the daily situations they have going on at the schools? Paul, why don't you kick us off on that?
Sure. Well, you've heard a couple of things already. It takes a collaborative approach, and I've really been encouraged to see the rise of behavioral threat assessment in many states. It's now required that we have a threat assessment team, and it's got to be functional. We want to always focus on making sure, from a physical security standpoint, that we've got excellent communication products and systems. People have to report. People have to be able to get mass notification announcements. Access control is really important. That's a big change since Columbine. Sometimes people ask, Jim, has anything really improved since Columbine? And I always say, of course, things have improved. Things have improved dramatically. That's not to say that there's not outliers, but now I find that most schools are running closed campuses. All exterior doors are closed and locked. We have to come through a single point of entry. There's often visitor management systems that are in place.
Yeah.
We get escorted to where we're supposed to go, so we don't have free reign of the building. There's a secured vestibule up front. All of those things have really helped and changing the culture. It felt like, and still there's still issues on ground that has to be covered, but it felt like a lot of times our staff was working against us when they propped the door open or didn't follow practices. But more and more, as we're educating, people are making personal investments, and the culture is becoming one that's got heightened awareness and better participation.
Yeah. Mike, what would you suggest? What are like we've talked about access control, we talked about communication. What are some of the other technology initiatives that schools can take to help create a safer environment?
Well, I want to kind of circle back to a couple of the previous questions and piggyback on something that both Paul and Guy talked about, but particularly Guy was he talked about the mental health. So I was a school district police chief from 1989 to 1999 for one of the highest risk school districts in the United States. It's a community, the community ranked this year #1 for violence per capita, number 15 for homicide, massive gang activity. While I was there, we stopped, I want to say, 12 imminent planned attacks. One was a bombing, one was a planned group shooting by 3 gang members of a school bus, and the others were planned shooting. Okay. I personally stopped one of those at gunpoint, literally, as the individual was trying to gain entry to the front door of an elementary school. And, one thing that I tell people is, a lot of our successes were the people processes we put in to supplement and augment the physical security. So, for example, I would say by the early to mid 1990s, we had 2 full-time intervention teams with a school district police officer and a school social worker working out of a car together all week. Now, these are police officers that are extremely well trained, far above the national average, much better paid, 25% above our state police, 6 weeks of academy training per officer per year. And so these are very robust personnel, if you will. And you mentioned communication. The shooting that I stopped was training we did with our school custodians and operating a 24/7 communication center 365 days a year. If the custodian who heard another custodian make a statement that he was going to go open fire at this school, if he had called 911, that shooting would have happened. But by knowing to call us directly, I mean, literally, I pulled up, I had to stop in the middle of the street and get out and draw my Glock pistol. It was that close, 5 seconds, and it would have, it would have been a response to a real tragedy. So I kind of want to mention that again, that the threat assessment and something I think Guy's going to talk about later, suicide assessment, those are the most important things that come to my mind, along with the third would be improved student supervision to prevent homicide, whether it's active assailant or the most common types of homicides. 8% of the people killed in K-12 shootings are killed in active shooter events. So we got to deal with that other 92%. And so Paul talked about access control. That's very important with the outside actor trying to come into the school. Now, to get onto the question you asked me last time, and I'll do this very quickly. We have the best security technology that I couldn't have dreamed of some of the stuff 10, 15 years ago. I'm very big on what I call smart cameras, highly capable cameras running some of the analytic programs, depending on the vendor, what they call them, but loitering detection, fence climbing detection, suspicious vehicle detection, license plate recognition. I mean, we've got a lot of good technologies with access control, with camera systems, communications. And it's a question, I think, of doing a very comprehensive assessment so that we can choose from those technologies to see what's going to get us the biggest bang for a buck. So we're seeing really horrific situations with these AI weapons detection systems that, as Guy puts it, are not quite ready for prime time. Exceptional technology that's just not there yet, at least the systems we've assessed. And then when you see districts dump millions of dollars into emerging technology that's not really proven, and then they don't have a threat assessment team, that becomes a big issue. So, having that comprehensive assessment and getting a blend between things like training, staffing, and the technologies, and of course hardware and those other things that we form into the layers that PASS recommends in its guidelines.
Well, it's interesting because as I've asked this question and we've talked, you guys are sharing more people roles and processes than you are technology, and that's really interesting. Guy, did you have a point on that?
Well, that's what we're saying. We're talking about unified life safety systems. So they can be the human rules and policies, the district policies of procedure, the architectural, the access control, the alarms and detection, the cyber, the communication, everything that we talk about in those past layers. We're talking about tools that our K through 12 stakeholders will utilize on a daily basis. So there is an interoperability being established from those human roles and processes by using those technologies and services that we deploy in K through 12. Those are all what we're doing now, where we weren't doing in the past, I would say, after Columbine, was because it's kind of like watching, I'm a Star Trek fan, I'll use this analogy. You watch the old school Star Trek with Kirk and Spock, right? It's like basic things, or imagination, and you look at the new things and all that technology. But where we are in this day and age is more unification of everything is taking place. Another piece I would say, we talked about police officers, security officers, mental health practitioners. One of the greatest improvements is getting everybody involved into the climate and culture in K through 12. Everybody up from the custodian all the way up to the teachers, superintendents, administrators. You think about that is empowering the folks. You could go to many schools. Probably the most respected person could be the custodian or the maintenance guy that's working there, or somebody, you wouldn't even think about that. So empowering all of our staff to be involved in creating that culture and climate, but also being able to, in their own way and capabilities, to respond to the needs of those students.
So over the last 25 plus years, one of the biggest lessons that we've learned, summarized real quickly, is that it takes a holistic approach for having safety. It's not just the SROs. They're wonderful. They do a great job. They get close to the kids, but it's not just the SRO's job. It's not just the administrator's job. It's everybody together. So keeping that in mind, everybody would include the students. So how do you build, what lessons have we learned related to winning the students over to trust that information they share is going to be acted upon appropriately? How do you build that trust with 16-year-old, 12-year-old, 9-year-old students? Paul, you're shaking your head. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thank you. And Guy, I did not know you were a Trekkie. It's the more we know about each other. But I want to say this, and I'm going to share just a brief story, a lesson that I learned. I know a school social worker who put out a survey to students and to teachers in a high school, asking the students to write down a list of who they would consider to be a trusted adult in the building. And they then asked the teachers, please write down which students you think would have named you as a trusted adult. And what they found was this. First of all, students didn't have as many trusted adults as they wished they would have, meaning the school, maybe a student listed one or two, and then the school's like, we wish there would have been more. And then the second thing they learned is that many teachers had quite a list of students they guessed would have listed them as a trusted adult who hadn't. And the social worker said this to me. She said, there were some students who didn't list any trusted adults, and those were my favorite because now I know who to approach. And the relationships are so important. We all know that. We all remember when we were in school, and who we might have considered to be a trusted adult, who we knew had already mailed it in and were looking for retirement. But I think all of that is really important. Teachers teach, hopefully they went into teaching because they like kids. And kids know whether or not you like them. And I understand that some teachers might become jaded over the years, but whatever we can do, you can't win over everybody or get into the kitchen of everybody, but you certainly can make a remarkable difference. We see that especially with coaches, but with teachers as well. The other thing I think is we can appropriately involve them in school safety initiatives. It wasn't too long ago that we had the pandemic, and there were sometimes protests in communities, and in some of those cases, students were leading those protests. they're ahead of us in technology. They've got a much better pulse of what's going on with the student body, and they're very capable. We should be learning, especially in terms of social media platforms and anything that involves technology. We should be learning from them. I have no qualms about saying to a student, please, I'm going to give you a couple weeks, take a few minutes to talk to the whole staff about this particular thing. We might learn something there. And so I think there's plenty of ways to do that appropriately.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Guy or Mike, y'all have anything to add to that?
I,
Let Mike go, and then I'll go a little close it out.
yeah, and I agree with everything you just heard. One of the things that a lot of people might not pick up on, that as a police chief, I picked up on very quickly. It's very important that students understand that if I go forward with information about my friend, that they're not going to be treated differently because of they're from the wrong side of the tracks, for example, right? And so a huge issue that I've seen is certain individuals being treated differently because of who mom and dad are. And a firm policy of mine was I didn't get involved with tickets, charges, uh, but my officers couldn't interfere with other officers' cases. And to the point that I actually had to go to the FBI Academy for 3 months without salary because I wouldn't interfere with an arrest of a board member's relative who was also a relative of a local government official. And at the last minute, the board member tried to stop me from going to the academy. And the only way around it that my superintendent would come up with is for me to go without salary for 3 months.
Yeah.
If I had to do over again, I don't like what happened, but I would fight that battle again. Because if those kids think that, you're the car dealer's kid or the judge's nephew or the superintendent's niece, you're going to be treated differently when you get caught with a gun or marijuana, then they don't as often, they're not going to be as inclined to come tell on one of their friends who's doesn't have those type of connections. And that's a really important point because kids are very judgmental compared to people in our age group who've been kind of beaten down sometimes by life. And they're very idealistic. And if we don't make them fully aware that, certain things, we're going to treat people based on the actions, not who they are or who they know.
Excellent. Guy, can you
Well,
sum up quickly
I think
for
one of the greatest lessons learned that we've had since Columbine is empowering our students to be involved in taking action, for example. And that could be things as simple as preparing them. Well, we think about a lockdown drill. We teach about the fire drills. We teach about tornado drills. And we think about things like initiatives with the American Red Cross and bringing in CPR, first aid, standard protocol training into the schools. But another thing I think why we're seeing a decrease in, say, the school shootings, for example, is that ability that we have seen where we are also empowering students to see something, say something. And Mike kind of touched on that with, giving them the ability to make an anonymous report. If they're not going to be fingered out as a rat or a squealer, but they're actually doing tremendous greatness in K through 12 by saving other kids' life by, if there's a self-harm incident, I've seen that many times in my career where kids would call their friend is suicidal. And when we get that welfare check right away through an anonymous reporting system, we send police over there and we find the kid literally hanging on a shower head, right? We get him cut down, but that other kid saved that kid's life. Or there's been many cases of I'm going to shoot up the school the next day, or Jimmy's got a bomb. He's making bombs in his garage. He wants to hurt others. So that ability to create anonymous reporting systems, but also make people empowered enough to not feel like they're being a squealer, but they're actually having a great impact on the life of protecting themselves and their school and their community and their fellow students is something that I think has been a great, tremendous leap forward. I commend, like in Colorado, for example, the Safe to Tell system. Fantastic system. I've seen that probably 15 kids I know of, they're probably alive right now because of that system, probably countless more. So I think it really does, as Mike had stated, and Paul had stated, we need to continue to keep empowering people to use these tools, but not to be like rats and snitches, but empowerment to actually impact life and protect themselves and others.
Jim, I agree. I agree with what Guy just said. I think the whole nation owes Colorado a debt of gratitude for Safe to Tell. And I know half a dozen or more states have also adopted something similar to that. In Illinois, it's Safe to Help. But it's not even just students who are utilizing that. It's staff members, it's parents. We often suggest, this should be up. It should be on newsletters. It should be on the electronic signboard scrolling in the schools. And all of a sudden, all stakeholders can be empowered to report. And really, it's that early reporting that helps avert a lot of planned violence.
Right. So there's not a magic wand that we can wave over a school and make it safe. It's all these pieces working together that's going to help these students. We're having more mental health challenges in our country now, and are we having more, or are people just more aware of them? That's a different subject for a different time. But I think that one of the biggest lessons we've learned is that it takes that holistic approach, like we said a moment ago, to make a school system safe, to make the students safe, and to create an environment where learning can happen. I know it's very challenging for schools because there's so much attention placed on security, and it should be, that it makes it difficult for them to think that, okay, I can also educate and train these kids. So, Mike, you and I have had this conversation before regarding discipline. Cameras are predominantly used on a daily basis to help administrators with discipline issues. That's not necessarily a bad thing, I don't believe. Is there a good statement that a disciplined school is a safe school? And if so, what kind of impact would that have on student trust and that environment where they feel like they can share things?
So there's actually data on it. State of California did 10 years of research on that and validated that very fact. Won't bog you down with what they found, but there's a good bit of evidence to that. One thing I want to mention about cameras, and up until 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of people in the field would have looked at me and as the anti-camera guy, because I was just case after case where we've got footage of a boy being raped in a stairwell by another boy for 30 minutes, and it's Exhibit A, in court against us. It did help validate, investigate the incident. But we actually have moved to a point, and cameras can't supervise students, but cameras and some of these other technologies can actually do a great bit to work with policies, practices, and procedures to dramatically improve student supervision, which if you look at when students die in school, student supervision is very often a contested issue there, at least an allegation that the supervision was not adequate. And I tell people one of the best ways to make your school safer is improve student supervision. And, that's for homicide. 45%, according to CDC, of people murdered on K-12 campuses, it starts with interpersonal conflicts, usually a fight. So the number of fights you have is followed by the level of gang activity. Those are the two strongest predictors that you're at high risk for homicide or non-fatal weapons assault in your school. So when you take things like just so many of the features, I don't want to just name a few, but when you take the features with modern analytic software programs and you combine them with things like no-go zones where students are off limits for certain areas unless they're with an adult certain times a day, and you've got teachers trained in student supervision, you can dramatically reduce your incidence, which correlates to what Guy mentioned earlier, academic achievement, butts and seats. We've got a kid in class instead of in the principal's office. We've got, an administrator helping kids, hiring teachers instead of dealing with another vaping incident, what have you. So, and I do want to kind of elaborate a little bit on this with an example that I hope God doesn't mind. But if I remember correctly, while Guy was there, his district stopped 4 imminent suicides through a combination of different technologies, such as Safe to Tell. Their camera system stopped. I remember one imminent suicide with a gun on an athletic field with an alert, one of Guy's personnel, and the awareness efforts that they had in place. So that's a perfect analogy of what we keep talking about, how you can merge these things together: policy, procedure, training, awareness, and then the right technologies. You're you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's awesome. The good insight. I think that the analytics have improved to the point now where you can get some accurate alerts based on cross-line detection and what direction someone's moving and loitering. And I would imagine it's very difficult in a school environment to have the somebody watching this. So how does that not become noise? What technology is available so it's not just always something popping?
I'd like Guy to start on that. Then I might have.
What I think about it is when you look at you determine the purpose, you determine the direction, and where you're going to deploy that technology, for example. And Jim and you and I have had this discussion about the most common practice in K through 12 when we look at a secretary, for example, doing the visitor management function through the vestibule at the school. So we think about that as a security director or a security practitioner. What we do is we apply that available technology to enhance his or her situational and to improve what they're responsible for at that school and taking away all that noise that you're talking about. So when we deploy that in, say, for visitor management, then we get to a security operations center where that's more dynamic. We have more analytics and situations. You could have, like when I left, we had 1,200 cameras, right? For example, if you just had 1,200 cameras up there, that would be almost impossible for 2 or 3 people to be monitoring on a daily basis. So those analytics are very important when a situation is detecting. Then you're able to zoom in and zoom in on those situations. And the really good thing is when we look at the average size of a school district in America is what, 8 schools, as what I've heard. When you think about that, that's 8. You could have potentially multiple situations happening at once in that. So having all that noise eliminated, you're able to drill down on multiple situations, and especially where the technology is now. However, you need to be careful about that. That's why you need to create that team that Mike and Paul mentioned, that team. You have to determine what your risk is first, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to mitigate, and going forward, and you do it on situational. And that one piece we always say, you've seen one school. Every campus is going to be different. Okay, every district is going to be different. So when we talk the concept of unified life safety, it's not the way you think of it, it's universal, but it's going to be different from school district to school district in many ways.
All right, so let's go back a little bit to the technology and some of the things that administrators can focus on. After Uvalde, door contacts really became something that we would do. So we've evolved, even with the past guidelines. Tier 1 at the very beginning was a doorbell at a school because there were so few schools that would actually have access control. But as the threat evolved, as technology has evolved, we've changed it. What role can door contacts play on student supervision and protecting from outside risks as well, and how important is that?
I'll go about it. I mean, we get a whole lot of issues with doors being propped open, and we know that it's awful. And so Door position switches, we can program so that it's 30 seconds. If that door is open for that amount of time, then it's going to notify us. And maybe we have a camera in that area. We can take a peek and say, oh, okay, I understand why that door is open. There's somebody standing there monitoring it. It's not an issue. Or whoops, I can see the prop. It's time to send somebody over there to make sure that the barn door is not open. All of those technologies, to Mike's point, have to be chosen for appropriate application. Because if we have a school and we say door position switches are going to save the day, and they're not really controlling access, or they've got less than excellent communication systems, we're really just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. And so we want to be careful in choosing. And I know many of these attendees today also saw that the PASS version 7 guidelines are out, and I'm thankful about that. And if they're not out today, they're out tomorrow. But we're even amazed on technical committees to see how many things we've got to consider as we move forward. But what we don't say is, well, this is all just a bunch of things we don't need. We understand the value in appropriate settings for these things, and then we want to make sure that we're looking at them closely. One more shout out to PASS on this, and then Guy, I'll let it go back to you. I'm sorry. But PASS has many white papers that talk about the value and the appropriate use of everything from weapons detection systems to mobiles, or whether you call them portables or learning cottages. It doesn't matter to me. How can we better protect things, and what systems and solutions are available to help us do that?
Okay.
I'd like to add,
Well,
when you're
Yep.
that. So,
go ahead, Mike.
no, you go ahead. I want to piggyback.
Okay, so when I think about door positioning searches, switches, I always think of access control, and we think about the tremendous improvements that we have done in that area since Columbine, the ability of empowering students and staff with the ability to lock the door from the inside. You know, number one, keeping the doors locked at all times as much as possible, but empowering the ability for staff and students to lock the doors on the inside, but also creating denying delay access, creating a physical barrier with our access doors, the locks that we put in, time saving, doors that lock from the inside, the deterrence factor. That's so important for when we're thinking about when we put a sensor on a door, or we put a door and hardware solution in there, we're thinking about how we can empower the learning environment on a daily basis for the day-to-day learning, but also for when the worst happens. So, when we look at the past guidelines, for example, we look at how we empower the day-to-day learning environment, but when the worst happens, how do we make faster lockdowns? How do we make a safer locking mechanisms to eliminate the need for teachers to exit the doors to lock and secure their doors, for example? And another thing would be the compliance with the safety and codes. We don't have a lot of codes in K through 12 when we're talking cameras, when we're talking a lot of these components that we may consider. There's not a lot of codes, but we're creating a standard or a recommendation and a guideline that could be a roadmap going forward for K through 12 facility operators and that unified life safety team to holistically apply these safety and security components. So it's great because what Paul said, you can't put in a door detector, nor can you put weapons detection in if you don't have your basic components in place, which are foundational components. And that's where I think we live in an age of very complex technology. We live in an age where people are attracted to things, like excited about new technologies and supposedly end all or over promising. But you know what we could do really good, as we're seeing the improvement in school safety now, is just get to the basics and build from there.
And what I'd like to add, Guy and I were expert witnesses on what ended up becoming the largest school security litigation to date in the U.S. So for 3.5 years, Guy and I, and probably about 10 or 12 of our other personnel, did the largest vaping assessment of K-12 schools to date. And we basically did vaping assessments, very specific to vaping, for every secondary grade level serving school in the 5, what they call bellwether school districts, the first 5 to go to trial. And Guy did a great deal of this work where we looked at, the policy practices, a whole variety of things, but we looked a lot at technology. And this is a good example when you talk about, door position sensors, because what Guy came up with was not just the importance of exterior access control where students might slip outside to go vape somewhere, even leave campus, which is a common problem, but interior access control, locker rooms, auditoriums. And so when you've got, the different ways of securing these areas, having that DPS to back that up was important. And what we had to do was prove in a federal court, being challenged by one of the largest law firms in the United States, we had to prove this stuff would work when combined properly. Okay. So we had vape detectors, we had analytic cameras, electronic hall pass systems, the door position sensors, and a whole host of those things combined together, that, none of this is going to make that very difficult problem go away, but we could show it was going to make vaping a very unlikely event. Now, something I want to mention that, Jim, you alluded to a little bit earlier, we increasingly are telling our clients that they've got, I would say, anything above 20,000 students, it's almost a no-brainer that they should have a 24/7 communications and monitoring center. And many of our districts now, even 10,000, 8,000, 9,000 students, are finding that to be practical, because when you take the kind of technologies and policies and practices and training we're talking about today, and then you've got people like Guy had on staff when they had a shooting in one of their schools, they absolutely reduced casualties dramatically because of good student supervision, good communications capability, some good training, empowerment of their employees. So, again, when you look at the wide array of technologies that for the right situation are good fits, and then you combine it with people that know how to run it. And the first time I toured Guy's comm center, he just came up to one of his people and said, "Show me the dumpster behind Smith Elementary School." And we were looking at it in 5 seconds. They knew how to work the cameras. They knew how to work the technology. And that gets missed sometimes. And also the personnel to maintain these robust systems, IT personnel, cybersecurity efforts, and so forth. Didn't mean to take quite that long, but I hope this is helping people see the amazing stuff you can do when you thoughtfully integrate these systems, as Guy keeps talking about.
Yeah, it is interesting as you look at it, how much things have changed even over the last just 5 years. The technology cost has dropped, the capabilities have increased, people are adapting to these systems, and it's really proven helpful, not just for the active threat situation, but for a lot of things that are happening inside of our schools, discipline, fire safety. You could have a chemical release, and you're going to use a unified platform with cameras and access to your PA. All of that in one platform that people can utilize can really help out quite a bit. Guy, if you could, Carl put into the chat if there was a website explaining the Safe to Tell, Safe to Help programs. So if you could throw that in the chat, that'd be great. Russ also mentioned that he sees schools using latch retraction monitoring along with door position switches, which, if a door latch is taped back, it will see it as a prop door. And again, this technology is getting more and more available for schools. It can be difficult because a lot of our schools have dozens and dozens of doors available for the students. What kind of steps on lessons learned during, and I'm going to throw you all a curveball because I didn't mention this question to you, but what kind of steps can a school take during class changes? So you get a high school and some middle schools, they're changing classes and doors have to be unlocked for a certain amount of time. What kind of precautions can schools take to mitigate that risk during that open period, that 5 minutes that the doors might be open?
Well, this is not easy at all. Mike mentioned earlier, student monitoring is a significant issue, but I'm far more concerned about exterior hallways. If we've got multiple buildings on a campus or portables, I'm far more concerned about that than on inside. But let's start with outside briefly. I think at a certain point, we have the ability to do electronic access control with students so that we don't have to leave doors unlocked. They can use those cards, especially if it's not even a passing period, but somebody's moving for one reason or another to another building. We can keep those doors closed and locked. In terms of inside the building, as I mentioned, monitoring is very important, and I think it's just an awareness of we've got to be in certain places. And a lot of times schools are being built today without even lockers in hallways. Maybe lockers are in classrooms, or maybe we've gone locker-less. So there's a whole lot of things to do, but supervision is one of those, and empowering students to be able to report. Early reporting is so important, and empowering staff to be able to supervise in an effective way. It's education.
I'd, I'd like to piggyback on that, Jim. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I muted myself again. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing, there's another approach. Some schools are doing what Tim advised with the access cards for students, and that can be particularly helpful. I know when we assessed Ketchikan, Alaska schools, they had a lot of students, seniors leaving and coming back, and they were having to walk around the building. And we said, look, you've got prox access on plenty of doors. What about making that a privilege for these students so they're not exposed walking all around the building? And they had not really thought of it that way. Other clients have had it where the doors lock and unlock at specific set times, and then personnel check, or you've got DPS to see if the doors haven't seated properly. That's one other approach. But one thing I strongly recommend is having a written student supervision plan for your campus with documentation as you go through and assign personnel, keeping that documentation to show who is where. That's incredibly important, first of all, to prevent things, but also if you're litigated. And one of the things that we find, teachers are generally not trained how to supervise. So one of the things that we did as part of that litigation, we're a nonprofit, so we produce a lot of free training videos. And so we produced a series of 3 training videos on how to uh, help address student e-cigarette use through improved supervision. And then we talk in those videos about how you can merge the technologies with these policies and practices. That's on the homepage of our website. Just type in Safe Havens International School Safety and it'll come up. And schools are free to use those to train their staff or just to get ideas on this. But when you look at our homicides, the most common scenario is a fight that leads to a shooting or stabbing. And then the second most common, 25% of our homicides, according to CDC, are gang-related events, and many of those are both. Where you've got gang members fighting, then you're really highly escalated for risk. So, as Paul said, that's a really key time for student supervision. And one thing most people are stunned to learn, Dr. Cornell's just put out some research on this recently. 72% of all the people shot on K-12 campuses in the last 20 years have been outside the building when they've been shot. And so now you get into not just the supervision, but things like reverse evacuation, being able to get people back into the building quickly and not making mistakes like having your proximity cards set to deactivate where the staff can't use them in a lockdown, because you're a lot more likely to trap people outside the building that way than to stop an attacker from gaining access to main hallways, taking an employee's ID. It's a possibility, but
Yeah.
the greater we've had a lot of mass casualty shootings. One with over 30 victims shot, where the attacker never went into the building, opening fire on a playground in 1989 in California.
So, Mike, do you recommend that schools during a lockdown situation that they would allow the doors to be open so people can evacuate from one building to another? How do you balance that with trying to keep a bad guy out of one building if they're in a different building? What's your insight on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I need to clarify. So I agree with what Paul said earlier. We want the envelope of the building to be secured. Okay. But what I'm saying is when you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 teachers with groups of students outside and you've got proxy access control, you don't want to have a feature. Most of those systems will allow you to shut their cards down because they're might get their card. But we've had so many people, we've had a lot of mass casualty shootings outdoors where people were killed because they couldn't get back in the building. So one lesson is not to have that practice of deactivating the cards. Now, what you can do is what Guy did, out in Littleton, where when you've got live monitoring, they can check their cameras quickly. And once there are no groups outside, then you can go in and deactivate those cards if you wanted to. You really wouldn't need to at that point. Another real quick aside, when you're looking at proximity access control, think of it that way. Think of emergency ingress to the building. So what we advise is you want multiple doors for any areas where there could be outdoor activities, playgrounds, athletic fields. You want those staff to have multiple options of doors they could prox into in an emergency in case it's not safe to go to the door they normally would go to. And why it's extremely important to have a reverse evacuation procedure originally developed in the state of Kentucky, and that be drilled and trained. And if you don't have that, you don't meet standard of care. You can't effectively lock down. You can't severe weather shelter for severe weather unless you have the capability to quickly move people back into the building. Very easy protocol to write, teach, and practice.
All right. So, in the next couple of minutes, Scott asks a good question. He says that now that school is getting ready to be back in session, what are some key things that schools should be doing to ensure that their technology and processes are working in that holistic manner? Does anybody want to jump in real quickly and just answer that, Paul?
Yeah, I think education is the key. We're always, sometimes confining safety and security education to like 20 minutes of the initial welcome back or whatever it might be. And I really think that we should make it part of the operational culture to have a few minutes of safety briefings all throughout the year. Now, of course, at the beginning of the year, we want to have that to lay out all of what we're thinking about and what we have in place, because even teachers are concerned. They might not know how many cameras we have or whether there's a threat assessment team or what the threat assessment team does. We want to educate on those kinds of things. And then we want to have touch points throughout the year where we're taking 3 minutes here, 3 minutes there to make sure we're talking about weather-related emergencies and preparedness, etc.
All right, excellent. And because we only got 2 more minutes left, so I want to try and summarize real quickly. But James had a great comment about changing permissions so that students would know where, or districts would know where students are on campus. So if you do issue cards to students, some of them have real-time tracking capabilities, so you could determine during a class if there's students in a stairwell. So you can use that technology. As we close here, and somebody volunteered for this, we only have 1 quick minute, but Martin asked a question: what about the schools that don't have the budgets for these security measures? What should they do? What's going to be their priority, and how can you get around that?
Well, they can have a safety planning team and they can have a threat assessment team and they can have these mechanisms in place that don't cost anything. And those groups can collaboratively solve these kinds of issues.
Okay, excellent, excellent. God, did you have something?
Yeah, I think get back to the foundational. Okay, look at what you have right now, how you can address that risk, analyze what you have right now and address those risks accordingly with what you have. But what I would also say is when you do this, build for when you can get future funding in the future. When we think about bonds or a grant, for example, grants are like unicorns, but think about that, plan for the future.
All right, excellent. Go ahead, Michael.
I think you got this on the past website. I'm pretty sure we polled our 60 plus analysts on what are the things they see most often as they assess schools around the country that are low cost, no cost enhancements to improve safety, security, climate, culture, and emergency preparedness. And then we developed that into a guide, 20 simple strategies for safer schools for the Maine Department of Ed. And that's a lot of ideas of things that you can do, often very impactful things that have low or no budget impact.
All right. So, and we're going to close now. Cheyenne asked about how can you get staff to respond better to threat assessments? Really, success breeds success. So if they see success happening, things happening inside the school that creates a safer and a more disciplined environment, they're more likely to participate and cooperate with the threat assessment process and the recommendations that people would make. Guys, this has been great. I appreciate everybody's patience as we walk through this. There's no magic wand. There's nothing you can wave over a school just to make it safe. It's about people, roles, processes, all things working together with the technology to create a safer environment. Please go to our website, get ready to download Rev 7. And if you ever need anything, please let us know. We're happy to answer any question whatsoever. Just reach out through the PASS website. Take care and have a great school year. Thanks, guys. Awesome job.